All right, welcome back. We are going to get started here, and we will try and end a little sooner so that we have good time for lunch here. All right, should we have a quick prayer before we start? Do you want to pray?
Let's just pray. Father in heaven, we thank you that you gave us the garden to work in. We thank you that you work with us there. We pray that you would help us to understand your ways better. In Jesus' name, amen.
All right, we will try and go quickly here. Winter harvest secrets, how to extend your growing season and grow in the cool weather in the winter. So we're going to cover three areas here. We call it CTP. It's our winter growing strategy. C is our simple formula to know what grows best in the winter versus the summer. T is the number one critical factor for a successful winter garden. And then P is the key to keeping plants alive in the cold and why wind is one of your worst enemies. And then we can also talk quickly about how to build your own winter quick hoop and why they are so effective. And this is a very simple protective structure that you can build to grow plants in the cool weather. So let's start with C, our simple formula to know what grows best in the winter versus the summer. And C stands for cold tolerant. Or you could also say C stands for choosing choosing what to grow. You could go either way.
Yeah. But choosing the right crop.
Yeah.
So imagine climbing a mountain, and as you go up the mountain, the vegetation changes from level to level. Is that right? And so as we go through the seasons, a similar process takes place on the same piece of ground. So in other words, what the vegetation that you find growing in the summertime is a little bit different than the vegetation you find growing in the wintertime. And of course, we're talking primarily about annuals. Those are the crops that die every year and regrow every year. And that's what most of our vegetables are. And yeah, because the perennials, of course, are there all the time, so they don't change. But yeah. So it's important when thinking about growing vegetables that you want to grow in the cold of winter to choose ones that naturally do well in the cold. So these are plants that have been developed from the natural plants that grow well in the wintertime. When we first started farming, we thought that growing in the winter would be easy because nothing would grow then. We found out that it doesn't work that way. We have a whole different set of weeds that grow in the wintertime from the summertime.
There still are some benefits. They don't grow as quickly and stuff like that.
Yeah, there are a number of benefits to growing in the wintertime, but you do still have weeds.
And we do want to work with nature as much as possible instead of fighting nature. So that's why we grow plants that like to grow in the cold instead of trying to grow a tomato in the middle of the winter, which is you're fighting nature. It doesn't like the cold. It's going to die with a frost, etc. Yeah.
So I mentioned Elliot Coleman before. He is the one who pioneered cold weather growing in the U.S. And he actually came to Europe and learned a lot of, he made several tours of Europe in order to, and then he came back to the U.S. and shared what he learned. But he said the secret to success in lengthening the season without problems or failures is to find the point at which the extent of climate modification is in balance with the extra amount of time money, and management skill involved in attaining it. In other words, if you want to grow tomatoes in the winter and you have an unlimited budget, you can actually do it. But most of us are not in that situation. And so what we want to do is to find what we can actually grow in the wintertime with the resources that are available to us. So not everyone knows what these vegetables are. I suspect most of you do, but when we were marketing to our customers on the farm, we had a customer who we actually, our primary marketing method is what we call a CSA. How many of you are familiar with that? Several of you. But the basic idea is that the farmer is selling a box of produce to customers directly on a subscription basis for the season. So they sign up for a season, and then every week or every 2 weeks, they get a box of produce. And we had one customer who told us that she signed up for our winter season. And after getting several boxes, she said she was appreciating the produce, but she was expecting more things like green beans and other things like that. And those are not cold season crops. We're not growing them. But and at first we kind of made a joke about that on the farm. But as I thought about it, I realized most people out there actually don't know, because you can go to the supermarket and you can buy whatever you want whenever you want it, because if it's not grown locally, it came from far away and it's still there. So the supermarket is not going to educate you about what can actually be grown when. So what's a simple way to to know what crops grow best in the winter and which crops grow best in the summer?
So we came up with this little rhyme. It says winter leaves and roots versus summer seeds and fruits. And this is generally true. Sometimes there's a few exceptions here, but winter leaves and roots. Most of the crops you're going to grow in the winter are ones where you eat the leaves or the root of the crop. So your spinach, lettuce, collards, kale, cabbage, you're eating the leaves, right, of those crops. Radishes, beets, carrots, turnips, you're eating the roots of those crops, right? So most of them in the winter are going to be your leaves and your roots that you eat off of it. In the summer, most of them are going to be the seeds or the fruit off of the plant. So
and when we say fruit here, we're using the botanical term of fruit, not the culinary term.
Yeah. So your squash, cucumber, tomato, eggplant, those are all the fruits off of the crop, right? Corn would be the seeds off of that crop. There are a few exceptions. For example, potatoes. Irish potatoes are a cool weather crop. They like the cold, but they will die with a frost, with a freeze. And so you can't grow them through the winter, but they do like it cooler. Sweet potatoes need very hot weather.
They'll die if they just think about.
I don't know if
weather.
you can grow them very well here. Usually, yeah. Some people have, yeah. So oftentimes they do best with a long, warm season. So there's a couple different exceptions, but most of them are going to fit in that little rhyme there. So let's look at a list of cold-tolerant veggies that you can extend your season with, or you can even grow these straight through the winter. We've divided them into 3 sections here: low freeze tolerance, medium freeze tolerance, and high freeze tolerance. That's how much of a frost these plants can handle before it kills them, right? Some of them can handle more than others. So low freeze tolerance. These would include crops like lettuce, chicory, that's your radicchio, endive, escarole, broccoli, cauliflower. Now broccoli is kind of a small exception here, and that is that you're eating the flower of the broccoli, actually. You can eat the leaves too. You can cook the leaves up and eat them as well, but the broccoli, you're eating the flower, and that flower is a little more sensitive than the leaves. So we've actually had them handle small frosts, but if it freezes too hard, that flower will really get hurt. Cauliflower, similar. Cilantro, parsley, radishes, celery, and bok choy. Medium freeze tolerance would be crops like Chinese cabbage, sorrel, rutabagas, kohlrabi, collards, kale, mosh. I was excited to see mosh served the other day. We don't see that in the U.S. very much.
The interesting thing is that mosh is a North American weed that was brought to Europe, and the French cultivated it and improved it and gave it some reputation, and so now it's come back to the U.S. and it's considered a high class thing, but
it's originally a weed.
It's originally a weed.
And then spinach, beets, carrots, parsnips, dandelion greens, baby greens, they can handle a good amount of freeze. Your high freeze tolerance would be things like purple top turnips. Those are just your regular standard turnips. Some of the salad turnips, like we have a variety in the U.S. called a Hackeri turnip. It's a more tender turnip, very sweet, very nice, but they are more of a low freeze tolerance. And then your Brussels sprouts, cabbage, Zucchini savoy, that's an Asian green. They can handle a lot of cold. We will just put them out in the field, and maybe sometime during the winter when it gets very cold, we'll put one row cover over them. We'll talk about protecting a little bit later, but they can handle a lot of cold. Yes, yeah. So cilantro can hold, and this is maybe a little different here than in America in the sense that cilantro, if it gets too warm, it will bolt quickly, or if the day length is really long. So in the United States, if we try and grow it in the summer, it bolts very quickly. Whereas here, you are at a higher latitude and probably does not get as hot as where we are, and so you may be able to grow it straight through the summer. I don't know. It can handle a small frost though, so it can actually go on the cool.
Yeah, we've grown it in the winter.
Yeah, but this is a good point, and we'll be touching on it in the next section in here on the timing, because it does not actually grow very much in the cold. It just kind of sits stationary, and so we'll touch on that. Yeah.
And I will say these categories here are based on our experience. I have read other people who are growing in the winter, and they categorize some of their crops in a different way than we did. So I don't know exactly why that is. You know, they said this one is really freeze tolerant, and we didn't think it was, or the other way around. So it's very relative and subjective, but this was our experience.
Yeah. One thing we do know is that the healthier the plant is, the more it can tolerate
true.
A harder frost.
Yeah.
So if you have really healthy plants, they can actually handle it more.
Healthy soil and healthy plants can take more cold than...
Yeah. Leeks.
Oh,
yes.
Leek is very cold, yeah.
Very cold tolerant. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good one. We should make a note and add it to our list. Yeah. Yes. That's right. Yes.
Yeah, we will talk about that.
So we'll talk
in just
about
a minute.
that next.
Yeah.
All right. So these are all great veggies to grow in the early spring, the fall, or even straight through the winter. Remember that your winter veggies are mostly leaf and root veggies, while your summer ones are mainly fruits and seeds. So the next one is T. This is the number one critical factor for having a successful winter garden. And what does T stand for?
T, someone says temperature. That's a good, that's the guess that most people would give, but it's actually timing.
T is for timing, and we already had a couple
Big
comments about timing, because this is actually what we would call the number one critical factor to make sure that you have a fall or winter garden.
Because I don't know exactly how your seasons work here, but for us, we have to begin thinking about growing in the winter in July. And it's the middle of summer.
You may have to think about it even earlier here. I don't know.
It's not in your mind to begin planning for winter, but that's when you have to begin planning for it if you want to have a successful winter garden.
Yeah. So it's true that we want to protect our veggies from the cold and the wind. That's true, but before we get there, we need the veggies themselves to protect. And perhaps one of the easiest things to get wrong is this timing, and that's why we call it the number one critical factor. Timing can make all the difference from having a harvest to having no harvest at all. So what happens is, as the weather gets cooler, and this is what some were mentioning just earlier, as the weather gets cooler and also as the day length decreases, your plant's growth slows down and eventually comes to a stop, or nearly comes to a stop. Sometimes it'll keep growing just very, very slowly, but it's like the plants almost hibernate over the winter.
So do you, in the U.S., when we buy seeds, they'll often say that it's 50 days to maturity. Do you have some kind of designation like that you use here? So that works in the summertime, but in the fall, going into winter, your days to maturity become a moving target. Every day it's changing.
Yeah.
And so that's what makes timing very, very critical.
Yeah.
And challenging. Yeah.
As a general rule, the plant's growth slows down the most when the day-hour length becomes 10 hours or shorter. Then your plants are growing less and less. During this period in the winter, your plants won't actually be growing, and hence the purpose in season extension isn't so much to actually grow the plants in the winter as it is to keep them alive through the winter. Yes, so you're keeping them alive, and then you can harvest off of them through the winter, but you have to have them there, and you have to have them mature to the size that they are so that you can be harvesting off of them during the winter. So the critical factor then is knowing when to plant your plants during the summer or fall, if it's a faster growing plant, so that it will be mature by the time winter sets in, by the time they basically stop growing, right?
It's by the time you reach about 10 hours of daylight.
In the spring, the reverse happens. So if you want earlier spring crops, you have to know how much earlier to plant them, because they're going to grow very slowly, and then they will start to speed up as you go into the spring. So here is a graph. This is taken from The New Organic Grower. This is a book by Elliot Coleman, the same gentleman we were referring to earlier, where he tracked growing lettuce at his location in Maine, which is actually much more similar to Europe here, latitude-wise. And he tracked growing lettuce through an entire winter and how long it took for that lettuce to be ready to harvest. So you can see down on the left-hand side here, at the bottom, you have the months of the year, August, September, October, November. On the left, going up, you have the number of days to harvest. So here in August, the lettuce would take about 47 days, and it would be ready to harvest. You come to October, you can see it takes a lot longer to be ready to harvest, and then back over in the spring and summer, it speeds up again. So as this is happening, your day length is shortening as you come down into these winter months, and also the temperatures are dropping. So you have two factors playing in there. And we'll just go through this quickly here. It will show how, once you come to the beginning of October, those lettuce plants are not ready to harvest until February. It's a long, long time. So I'll show you in a second here a little more visually. So if I was to take this line at the beginning here, 47 days, it would just come, about a month and a half there. Beginning of September, it's 70 days. But you can see once you get to the beginning of October, that's a whole 4 months before that lettuce is ready to harvest. You can see they were only seeded 1 month apart, 4 weeks apart, but they're going to be harvested almost 3 months apart, right? So you're dealing with this curve as you go through the winter, and you have to make sure you get it in early enough to be able to have a good harvest. We will show you, this is just a little teaser for our session tomorrow, when we talk about having a perpetual harvest. How many of you like the idea of having something fresh out of the garden every single week through the whole year? Does that sound like a dream? That's the gardener's dream, right? We want to have something fresh to eat out of the garden. And so tomorrow, we'll be talking about a perpetual harvest, and we'll show you a visual demonstration of planting for a continual harvest of lettuce and what that looks like over an entire winter, going with a similar graph like you're seeing there. All right, so timing is perhaps the number one thing that causes most winter gardens to fail, because many, many times people don't think about it until it's too late, and then they plant it, and it doesn't grow large enough, doesn't grow to maturity, and then you don't have the plant, the harvest there. However, what if you do get your plants planted late? Can you save them? The truth is that the day length factor, the shortening days, definitely plays in. It comes into factor with your plant's growth slowing down, but heat does play a role as well. That temperature does play a role as well. And so you can think of protection or warmth as a little buffer to encourage your plants to grow a little faster as those days are shortening. So you can, what would you call it? I was going to say you can trick the system almost, but it's not really tricking the system. It's just, it's giving your plants an extra little boost by using protection.
Yeah, you can speed up the growth by having them protected.
You definitely don't want to rely on heat to grow your veggies during the cold unless you have an unlimited budget and you can build a huge greenhouse and have heaters. We don't have that type of money, so we can't do that. Unless you're doing it commercially, then sometimes it can be more viable. But usually you don't want to rely on the heat. It's much better and will save you a lot of time and energy just to make sure you get them started at the right time. All right, so let's talk about P, which is the key to keeping plants alive in the cold, and why wind is one of your worst enemies. How many of you can think of what P would stand for now? Protection? Yes, protection. P is for protection.
So the basic protection basically is just changing or modifying the environment that the plant is growing in some way to make it a little more protected. And there are a lot of different ways that this can be done. Some are very, very simple, and then you can get more and more complicated. So this happens in nature all the time. You've heard about microclimates. You know, the south side of a hill can be a microclimate. It's warmer than on the north side, for example. You know, so this kind of thing is, but there are other kinds of microclimates. For example, where we live, the land is hilly, and we have a house on top of a hill, and it's about 200 feet elevation above where the fields are. And in the wintertime, the cold settles in those fields. And we can have as much as 10 degrees Fahrenheit difference in temperature between the house on top of the hill and the temperature in the field. So that's again microclimates.
It's so much that as you're walking up the hill, you can feel the air getting warmer.
Yeah. Suddenly, the air is warmer here. Yeah. Um, so all of these little situations create microclimates where different kinds of plants can thrive. So our goal in protection is to do this as simply and economically as possible. And if you're gardening around your house, for example, you can, if you have one side of your house or a building that faces south, you can grow something on that side that you could not normally grow in your environment, just with that alone, no other protection. So our goal in protection is to do it as simply and economically as possible. And so then the question is, how much are we willing and able to how far are we willing and able to go in providing that protection? One thing we want to note is that there is more to protection than protection from temperature. One of the main things that we're protecting from is wind and also frost. When those two things, because the wind and the frost on the leaves of the plants can dry the plants out, and they make them more tough. And
can also burn, like you can have wind burn on the plants.
Wind burn on the plants, yeah. So, but warmth is also important, and being in a more protected space also provides the warmth, usually. So the more still the air is around the plant, the lower the temperature the plant can take. So I don't know how many of you have done hot and cold treatments. Okay, so you put your hand, for example, in some very hot water, and then you move it to the cold water. So when you first put it in the water, either hot or cold, it's very, it feels extreme. But if you hold it still, it becomes a little bit better. But as soon as you move it, you feel the heat or the cold again. So this is the same with the plants. If you can keep the air very still around them, your body temperature is modifying the temperature of the water right next to your skin. That's why it feels a little bit better than when you move it around. And so if you can keep the air very still around your plants, the same thing is happening. They're able to survive much colder temperatures with very still air than if they're out in the open.
We have had lettuce. I don't know if did we have this in here? It might be in the slide a little bit later, but we've had lettuce that has survived down to -5 Fahrenheit. What is -5 Fahrenheit to Celsius? -20 Celsius. That we've had lettuce that has survived down to -20 Celsius just with protection. No heat, no additional heat or anything, just keeping the air very still around it. And we put like this blanket type fabric. We'll show you in a little bit here. Now, at that point, when we were farming at the time, so we would pray over our crops. And also the edges of the protected space, the lettuce did not do well, but in the very middle, it survived. So that's really pushing the boundaries almost as far as you can go, right? But it shows that if it's very, very still, it helps protect those plants and they can handle much colder temperatures, because we would normally put lettuce in the low freeze tolerant category. But -20 is a very hard frost, very hard. All right. It's also like the wind chill that we feel out when we go out on a cold day. The temperature will say it's 21 or it's maybe 5 degrees Celsius, but it feels like -3, right? So it's the similar thing with our plants. And also you don't want them to be wet and have wet and wind at the same time, because that's even adds more stress to the plant. So practically, when it comes to creating a microclimate in your garden for growing through the winter, there are a couple things to consider. The one is the microclimate where you're growing. So you may look around your property and see, where do I get the most sunlight? Where does it naturally stay the warmest in my area? Can I grow my plants there? And then protection from the wind and elements, where it is an additional factor where you can actually enhance or create your own microclimate for your plants as well. Yeah, very good question. So we'll touch on that a little bit when we come to the protection. Yeah.
And she had a question.
Yes. Mold.
With mold.
Yes.
We'll talk about that in just a minute too.
Yeah, we'll talk about handling mold
Yeah.
under your protected areas.
Yeah, that's
as
a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the end, you may want to look at protecting your veggies from wind before worrying as much about keeping them warm. And the truth is, they go hand in hand. So if you protect it from the wind, they will naturally stay warmer as well. So let's talk about practical ways to protect your plants. They can take on many forms, from as simple as a windbreak or a hedge to building a full-fledged greenhouse. So we'll go ahead and cover several different ways to protect your veggies here.
So one way, as Paul said, is just a windbreak or a hedge. That can actually provide several degrees of protection. If you know that your wind usually comes from a certain direction and you have some way to block that wind, just that alone will provide you some protection. Another simple way is, you can see illustrated here, something we call a cold frame. It's very simple to make that and put it in. Many times people will use, take old windows or old glass doors from houses and just repurpose them, so you can do it make that kind of structure very economically.
Do people use these a lot here in Europe? Yeah. Yeah.
Of course, you have to be prepared to ventilate it on sunny days. Whenever the sun comes out, you have to remember to go and open it up to ventilate it. It's helpful if you don't have a lot that you're wanting to grow. If you want to, the ones that we have illustrated here, you can't grow very large crops. Like broccoli would have a hard time fitting inside one like this, but you can do a lot inside them.
Yeah, you could grow the smaller crops like spinach or radishes, or carrots would be a great one for inside a cold frame as well.
One thing that we use a lot is something we call floating row covers. And I haven't asked, but I'm quite certain that they're available here. What are the common names for them here? Fleece.
Fleece, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it's what we call a spun bonded fabric. It's not a woven fabric. It's very lightweight, and that's the cheapest and easiest way to protect crops through the winter.
Yeah.
Some of the advantage of these fabrics is that they're lightweight. They allow light to pass through, and they're breathable. They allow air to pass through, but they protect from the wind. Yes. Yes. We'll get to that in just a second. So they protect from the wind, but they increase the temperature underneath them, and they're very cost effective.
Yeah. All in all, this is probably our favorite low-cost, easy way to protect your plants.
The other thing that's not specified there is that they allow water through them as well.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So you can, how do you use it? You can just throw it on top of your crops and just let it rest on top of them. We do that for some things, but for the crops where you're going to be harvesting the leaves, we like to prop it up off of them, because where the leaves touch the cloth when it freezes, they might get a little damage. And so it's not going to be as pleasing as if you have it propped up off of them. So how do we prop off the cloth off the crops? You can see illustrated here some wires. That's one way we do it, is by having wires.
And that air gap also creates extra little bit of insulation, as it were, as well.
Yeah.
Between the.
Yeah.
But the crops that we don't eat the leaves, like carrots or cabbage, I was telling you earlier about, we may just throw a cover over the cabbage. That's because the cabbage, we don't mind if the outer leaves get a little bit of damage, because we're going to peel those back
use them anyways.
when we actually eat the cabbage, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Another way is to build a quick hoop, which is like a miniature little hoop house that you can build for your plants. Yeah, yeah.
Well, we're talking about how to be most economical. So the little ones are more economical. You can cover
cost less.
You can cover a lot more space for the same amount of money, for a small amount of money. But if you have the money to make a big one, I would do it for sure, because it's so much nicer to be able to be inside and working with your vegetables than to be out in the weather.
Yeah. If you choose to purchase a row cover, I guess this touches on Rostislav's question, which is, what would we suggest in the thickness?
Yeah. And so what we use, I don't know how they make them here, or how they.
What's your designation
for thickness? Because they make them in different weights, and so we use grams per square meter. Yeah, I don't know exactly what that is, but the thickness of it. So we use a 1 ounce, and a 1 ounce fabric. You can also measure it by the amount of light that it lets through. So the lighter the fabric, the more light will come through. 30 grams per square meter. Okay, so at that thickness, about 70% of light comes through the fabric. And so we're in using the fabric, we're trying to balance. We want as much light as possible, and we want as much protection as possible. But the more protection, the less light. So we're trying to find the balance there, and we've found for ourselves that weight is the nice balance between protection and light.
Where we are in Tennessee, one row cover can effectively protect most of the medium freeze-tolerant crops that we were talking about. Sometimes we'll pull a second one over when on nights that the temperatures drop even lower. But we'll only pull the second one over overnight. So we put it on in the afternoon, we'd leave it over the night, and then we would take the second row cover off during the day because you still want that light to be able to get through. And if you leave that second cover on, it's blocking even more of the light. We've done it, and it actually gets colder under there because the light doesn't come back in to warm it back up.
There was one time we had some crops that we knew we were not going to harvest for several months, and we just left them covered with 2 covers. And when we finally took the cover off, it wasn't good. You know, they had been stunted in their growth. It wasn't helpful. So in using row covers, there's a general rule of thumb. You can leave 1 layer on all the time. And if it's just floating row cover, you can leave 1 layer on, and it's breathable, and water goes through it. We get quite a bit of rain in the wintertime, and so we don't even need to water our crops while the cover is on because they get water through the fabric. And so we just leave 1 on all the time. And then the second one, as Paul said, when we see that at nighttime the temperatures are going very low, then we'll pull the second one over it. And then in the morning we take it off again.
Yeah. Because they are breathable, you don't have as much mold issues as if you were using like a plastic or something that is not breathable unless you're getting good ventilation. And if you are having mold issues, you may want to take that cover off more and allow for more good ventilation inside there.
So I'll give an example. We also use these inside the hoop house. Now, we call a hoop house is like a greenhouse structure, but without heat. So it's very simple, just 1 layer of plastic. And we will use the floating row covers inside to give extra protection. But if you're using it in the hoop house, the hoop house itself is the first cover. Remember I said the rule is you can leave 1 cover all the time. So the hoop house itself is your first cover. You never want to leave a floating row cover on inside the hoop house all the time. That's very bad. And you know, I've had very bad fungus problems because of doing that. So you just pull the row cover inside the hoop house at night and then take it off in the day. Or if you have a spell of very cold weather, you know, that it's going to be cold all day long for some time, maybe you can keep it covered in, you know, during the day as well. But generally, if the sun is shining, you should take it off.
All right, so this is what we were just talking about, how you can double up the covers. Sometimes, if it gets very cold, you can even do 3, 4 covers. We had a situation where my Uncle John was trying to protect tomato plants, which cannot handle a freeze, and so he put on multiple covers, and it just acts like a thicker blanket over that crop. All in all, row covers are probably the best balance between cost efficiency, protection, and labor. However, the next step up is to make a high tunnel or a caterpillar tunnel. And then the next up from that is a hoop house or a greenhouse. And again, if you have the budget to be able to do that, we'd highly encourage it. It's much nicer. You'd be able to walk in with your plants and take care of your plants that way.
This illustration here is what we call a quick hoop. Yeah. And the material that we use to make the bows that are holding we call it electrical conduit. It's what they use in building to run the electric wires. Do you use that here? Yeah. Okay, so we have it in plastic and we have it in metal. And we use both. The plastic ones are nice because they just bend. But if we're using the plastic ones, we'll cut rebar. Do you know what that is? It's iron rods that are used in construction, in concrete. So I don't know what, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's what holds the cement together. Yeah.
So, we'll cut 2-foot lengths of that and put it in the ground and then leave about 10 inches above the ground and then put on top of it so that it helps to hold it in place. With the metal ones, you can, in the US, we have available a bender that will bend the metal the exact shape that you want. And I don't know if that's available here.
They
Yes,
have a bender.
but usually the ones for plumbing bend it in a sharper curve than we want it to. When we buy the rebar, I mean the electrical conduit, it comes in a 10-foot length. It would be about
A little over 2 meters.
three
You said 3
meters.
meters. Yeah, thank you. A little
Yeah,
over 3
it'd
meters.
be about
yeah.
3 meters. So what lengths do yours come?
About the same.
Probably about the same. Okay. So that we like to grow in a 30-inch bed. I think that's about 75 centimeters. 75 centimeters wide. And then we leave
30-centimeter pathway.
a 30-centimeter pathway and then another bed. And that one rebar, I mean the one electric conduit will go over 2 beds. Yeah.
It's about 2 meters wide.
Yeah. And we used that system to grow a lot of produce through the winter. We had half an acre in those kind of things before we could afford the hoop houses. We still use it a lot, even with the hoop houses, but you can do a lot that way.
Yeah.
We would make it about 2 meters. Yeah. And it depends if you have a lot of snow, then you would make it closer. And if you get a lot of snow, I would also recommend that you consider putting plastic on top as well, because the floating row cover collects the snow. It doesn't come off of it. And so then the weight of the snow can collapse your hoops.
If you do that, you may need to ventilate more often, though, as
But
well.
if you put the plastic, then you be thinking more about ventilating.
Yeah. And
The hoops and iron, they're stronger than the plastic ones. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. The other advantage is you don't have to put in the little rebar stakes on either side. You can just push the whole thing into the ground. And so it makes it a little faster to put up and to take down.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing to note here is you want a row cover that is large enough that it will go onto the ground on either side a little ways, and then we would put sandbags at every single hoop, because the wind will wiggle your row cover loose and will blow it away. We've had that happen multiple times.
And we've tried lots of different things to hold the row cover down: rocks, wood, all kinds of different things. And I highly recommend the sandbags. It's it's the best.
Yeah.
It's the easiest to manage also, to move them. Yeah.
The next step up is to make a high tunnel or a caterpillar tunnel. This is basically a very large quick hoop. So at its most simple structure, you can do ones This one has what we call a Gothic peak, so it actually does have a peaked roof here. It sheds snow better, but you can get ones that are just a big, huge hoop, and you put plastic over them. They're less expensive than an actual hoop house that's more stationary. It's basically a large, quick hoop that can be built, but it's smaller and simpler to construct than a full-size hoop house. My cousin Jonathan sells these as kits through a company called Farmer's Friend, and there are many people here in Europe that purchase them. He'll ship them across. Yeah, they'll ship here as well. So you can, if you're interested in a kit, but you may have other companies here in Europe that sell kits for these. I don't know as well. Caterpillar tunnels can be constructed yourself, or you can purchase kits, like I just mentioned. And then a hoop house or a greenhouse. Some people wonder what's the difference between a hoop house and a greenhouse. A hoop house is a simple structure with a plastic that is not heated. It does not have any extra heat. A greenhouse is where you would have a heater or something in there that is providing extra heat. And oftentimes they'll do 2 layers of plastic over the roof with a blower that blows air in between them to even add an extra layer of insulation over the roof as well. All right, a hoop house or a greenhouse really is the ultimate way to take your garden to the next level. We already touched on this earlier. They are more expensive, so it takes a little bit of a higher budget. But if you save up for it, and you can purchase, you can purchase large ones or you can purchase small ones. And the small ones themselves can be very beneficial in starting starts inside them or growing things inside them as well. But it can be very nice to have that door, be able to walk in and out. You can also grow more tall crops effectively in a hoop house than in a caterpillar tunnel. So if you're trellising tomatoes, there's sometimes advantages to having that structure that you can trellis plants up on and stuff like that.
Of course, here especially in the northern parts of Europe, again, you can get a lot of good use out of the hoop house in the summertime as well as the winter.
For many home gardeners, we would suggest going with a caterpillar tunnel, which is very similar to a hoop house. It's a smaller hoop house, and you can make it almost just as nice. You can add end walls onto it with doors and everything, and you can make it nice as well. Cost-wise comparison, again, this is in US dollars, so the euro is, I think, a little stronger than the dollar right now. Is it pretty close, or? Oh. Yeah, it depends on how big it is, exactly. But this would be for a similar size. A hoop house can be anywhere between 5 to 10,000.
Covering a similar amount of land.
Caterpillar tunnels are a little more expensive than is shown here right now, at least. It would be, maybe you could do it if you built it yourself around this much, maybe a little less if you were careful. But if you buy a kit, it may be more up towards 1,800 to 2,000. Yeah. This would be a 100-foot caterpillar tunnel. The hoop house here would be anywhere between a 50-foot to 100-foot. Could get even higher than 10,000. Yeah. The hoop house would be about 30 feet wide, like 30 by 50 or 30 by 100. And then the caterpillar tunnel is about 16 feet wide by 100. You can also get them in smaller lengths as well. Yeah. All right, so so there are many different ways you can practically extend your season using something as simple as a hedge all the way up to a full-scale greenhouse. And we kind of wanted to go from the very simplest all the way up to the most expensive. And with any of these, you can use, like inside the hoop house, as my dad was saying earlier, you can use those row covers. You can even build the quick hoops inside the hoop house, and you have that extra layer of protection there as well. So you can kind of mix and match the protection methods together.
Polytunnels, yes.
Polytunnels,
okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
is an excellent suggestion, yeah.
Yeah, good point.
All right, our time is up, and this is the end of this session, and I know that we need to go over to lunch, so why don't we end with a word of prayer, and then we'll head over. Heavenly Father, thank you for this time to be able to talk and share about growing through the winter, different crops, and we just pray that you would bless each one here that decides that they want to grow something. Pray that you bless those seeds as they start them and as they grow them, and bless as we continue through the rest of this conference as well as we go to eat. May our fellowship be sweet together. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.